Hello, and welcome back to another RiftGuides WildRift video. Riot just put out one of the biggest patches we've ever seen, and it's just a B patch. So ever since they changed the patch management, or generally the management of WildRift, to the Chinese office, we are seeing way more changes, way faster, hot fixes, and everything. So it's a pretty good thing that's happening, and I'm very curious to see what we will see in patch 5.0 around the new year. So let's take a look at this patch. For this patch, we get a new champion called Sivir, the Battle Mistress. She is an AD carry and will be primarily played in the Dragon lane. Maybe we'll see her in the mid lane depending on her wave clear capabilities, but we'll make a quick little guide on the release, so stay tuned for that one. But without any further ado, let's get right into the changes of the champions. And we have a pretty big change for Darius. His passive gets a lot more damage. As you see, it has a level scaling. And the level scaling is increased from 1.5 to 2 actually, and it gains a 10% extra bonus attack damage scaling. This should not only make Darius better during the laning phase, allowing his passive to deal a lot more damage, but also buff his jungle a lot more. He also gains more healing on his first ability. However, this doesn't really change that Darius struggles into most divine users in the Baron lane, and in the jungle he usually gets outpaced in a sense of he cannot really reach. However, if you get ahead on this champion, he's very powerful. So we assume that this champion will rise in the power rankings in the jungle by at least one tier. Next up comes the biggest winner of the patch, and we have Ezreal, and he gets multiple buffs in this entire patch. So let's start with the direct buffs. His base stats are getting buffed, he gets 4 AD. Not only this, his passive is also getting buffed. The attack speed bonus from his passive goes up from 10 to 13%. So if you consider all stacks combined, that's a 12% attack speed increase. Not only this, but also his first ability's cooldown in the early levels goes down. This is already quite a lot, so stay tuned for the other changes later in the patch. The next champion for the buffs is Gallo, and Gallo gets 30 base health and 4 base armor. The issue is Gallo has only been played as a supportive champion, and he's been mostly played for his global presence. Outside of this, he really doesn't offer too much unless you want to go for fun and go full AP and just blow somebody up. Nonetheless, a buff is a buff. The biggest loser of this patch is Hackam, because these nerfs are quite more impactful than you believe. First off, they remove 4 base AD of this champion. Not only this, but he also loses 30 base health. And now we go to the real next issue for this champion. They're lowering his first ability's base damage by 5 on level 1, doesn't sound so much right now, but they also lower the empowered damage from 135 to 125. So now let's talk about the issue with this and what it does to Hackam. Hackam's damage is being tackled in a sense that his most spammed ability, his first ability, is getting lowered in a sense of damage, while his base stats and base AD, from which everything scales, is also getting lowered. This will lead to him having a weaker early game, a weaker late game, and obviously a weaker jungle clear, giving other champions more time to do something against him. However, there's one problem with this champion fundamentally. His kit for WildRift is very abusable, and he can basically farm people on cooldown once he has his boots, because the people really can't run away from him. However, if I've shocked you right now, don't be too worried, because Hackam isn't bad now, he is just less good. So I wouldn't be very much surprised to see more nerfs coming to the horsey very soon after. A champion on the buff list which you would have never expected is Aelia. Aurelia's Ionian Fervor, her passive, is getting buffed. The base damage on the highest rank goes up by 20, and the attack damage bonus scaling goes up by 5%. Not only this, but her third ability's cooldown is also going down by 1 second. Now there's one problem with Aelia though. This champion is a feast or famine champion. You need to snowball very hard, and even then you're falling off very fast simply because how your champion works. This nonetheless will give her more power during the early or mid-game stages of the game before she falls off in the late stages of the game. Fundamentally though, she is still a very difficult champion to pull off, and she won't find much success simply due to her kit. In the past she had way more success in the jungle department, but they chose to completely remove the bonus damage from her passive on monsters, so yeah, she quickly died down after. A very interesting nerf we are seeing is coming to Jinx, but it's not as meaningful as you might believe it is. Her passive, Get Excited, is losing 10% bonus movement speed on a kill and 3% bonus attack speed. So if you're already winning after a kill, it really doesn't make too much of a difference. The other change is coming to her first ability, Switcheroo. They're buffing the early attack speed from her minigun. On level 1 of that ability, it gains 5% attack speed. On level 2 it's the same, and afterwards it's 5% less and 10% on max rank. At the same time though, they're nerfing the Fishbone's damage, the rocket launcher's damage by 3%. Now, if you see all of this, it really doesn't matter too much, and it's only a slight slap onto the wrist of a Jinx player, because fundamentally speaking, as long as Runance is still in the game, and as bugged as it is, this champion is still very good. And the only thing that Jinx actually struggles with is mana management. So if you want to see Jinx being very broken, then they should change something about the mana, and then they can take a look at other things after. But as for now, Jinx as it stands isn't as overpowered as you think, and these nerfs really don't do anything to really impact her placement overall. The next champion on this list is going to be Karma, and she's getting buffed. And yep, you heard it right. And now let's guess what is going to be changed about Karma. Yep, this champion gets more damage. Her first ability's cooldown is going down by 1 second. If you consider that she buys so much cooldown reduction, this is quite a big buff. And not only this, her ultimate's damage is getting a 20% increase in scaling and up to 40 more base damage. Oh, and in case you didn't know a good Karma build right now, just go put some mana, Luden's Echo into Harmonic Echo, and you'll be the most broken Karma you've ever seen, and now dealing even more damage while providing superb utility for your teammates. Oh yeah, and do yourselves a favor. If you start with an empowered second ability, you will always be guaranteed to hit your ultimate, your meteor, and obviously your first ability. So stop trolling yourself, learn to combo right on Karma, and then life will be beautiful. A nerf everyone is happy to see is about Lulu. However, the nerf in general isn't as big as it should have been, but well, it's still a nerf. So Lulu loses 6 base armor and her shielding from picks goes down by 15, at least in the early stages of the game. So this makes Lulu a little bit weaker and more susceptible to all-in and her capabilities of shielding her allies. But the real issue with Lulu is the damage she provides to an ally of hers. Picks damage is way too high for what it basically costs her to do. Well, casting a spell onto an ally. And as the game progresses, on 2 to 3 items, roughly you will have like plus 130 on-hit damage on every single auto attack. If you think about the AD carries you play Lulu with, you quickly understand why this is so much of a problem and why this feels so overbearing, and why champions that are usually played with Lulu feel way stronger than they are without a Lulu, which then completely messes with the perception of champion strength, aka hello Vayne. But yeah, we take any nerf to this little monster that we can get. The next change we got is coming to Nooo, and here we have a change to his first ability's cooldown and the flat healing of it. Also touching his ultimate ability Absolute Zero, granting it more flat damage on the minimum damage and more maximum damage. However, all of these scalings are completely untouched. The next buff we are seeing is Pantheon, and I don't really understand why we see a Pantheon buff. But again, the change to Pantheon is really completely impactless. We see a buff to his ultimate ability's cooldown. It's a 5-second change, so it really doesn't do too much due to how this champion is played and what he does on the map. So generally speaking, when we see like cooldown changes on ultimate abilities, they are usually not as impactful unless they're like super high, simply for the fact that you don't use this ability as often and only about key situations, and therefore they're just not really as impactful compared to like a normal ability. Let's say Pantheon's first ability got a 2-second or 1-second cooldown buff, going down from like, I don't know, 5 seconds to 4 seconds. That is a massive buff coming to the early game power in the laning phase, as well as the jungle clearing and overall, but for ultimate abilities, it's not as impactful. However, the next change is going to be really impactful, and here we have a Renekton buff. His ultimate ability is getting giga buffed. It's getting 50 health more on level 1, less cooldown in the late game, and 20 more damage per second in the early stages of the game. So, as you all know, Renekton is really struggling in WildRift currently, like he's not really a very strong pick, but if they keep on doing this over and over again with every single ability of Renekton, then we have a big problem very soon, and this champion will be completely overstat. Because take a good look at this. He gains 300 health now, and his basic magic damage around you will deal as much damage as an auto attack on that level. Not only this, if the enemy itemizes Tabi or plated steel caps, this, because this is magic damage, will completely go around this and absolutely annihilate them, while you can go for plated steel caps yourself and absolutely don't care about their damage unless they have a similar mechanic. So yeah, Renekton is going to be better, but obviously he's not good, but we best believe, or you best believe, that this will not be the last buff to Renekton, and we soon will have a big problem. Riven is also getting a buff to her passive and a second ability. Her passive gets 10% flat more damage in the scaling department, and the stun gets a 1.5 second cooldown reduction in the early stages of the game, and luckily not in the late stages of the game because it remains the same. Because keep in mind, Riven has a lot of ability haste, and if this one had a lower cooldown, you would be permanently CC'd later on. A champion who has been desperately craving buffs outside of Arena, by the way, is Swain. And here we have a change to his passive. Instead of gaining 12 health per soul fragment, he now gains 16. Not only this, we also have a buff to his ultimate ability. Its healing is getting increased by a 3% AP scaling, and its damage is getting lowered in the flat department but increased in the scaling department. It loses 5 flat damage but gains 5% scaling. Now let's talk about item changes, and first we have Bloodthirster. This item was absolutely broken and we can all agree on that one and needed to be touched. However, they're only nerfing it by 5 AD and removing 5% attack speed. And here comes the real kicker when it comes to the recipe. They're now adding another longsword to the build path, which makes it easier and better to purchase and not being like, I'm an absolute pain after buying my Vampiric Scepter and then I have to buy a Cloak of Agility and then I have to spend another 1100 gold to complete my item. But now you have an extra longsword after you build your boots, which means for an objective fight you might even have Gluttonous Grease, Vampiric Scepter, and obviously, maybe, another longsword, which then again adds a lot of extra damage to your fight capabilities. The next item, which is virtually kinda useless, is Champong Chainsaw, and they're increasing the item on many levels. They're giving it 5 more base AD, 50 more health, and 5 more ability haste. But here comes the real issue. All champions want armor pen in some kind of way, and why would I build an item that doesn't grant them any armor pen if the stats on the item aren't strong enough? And in reality, here's something you need to know about anti-healing items. Upgrading them grants you only bonuses from the item themselves and 10% extra anti-healing. The component version for the anti-healing items, in this case the Executioner's Calling, is only 800 gold for a 40% healing reduction. So if you want to buy anti-healing, just build the small component and sit on the component until the very end of the game, and then you build whatever you need. With this, Champong Chainsaw has gotten more attractive, but is it really competitive with an item that grants you armor pen if you really need armor pen? I don't believe so, but at least the alternative has gotten a bit better. Riot also headshot one item which is called Crystalline Reflector. They completely removed all the scaling on this item and just added flat values. So now they're trying to fix this item, bit by bit at least. They're giving it 50 more health, giving it the magic penetration bonus that all other items have, and they're increasing the physical damage blocked by 10, up to 25. But well, the item's issue is still the same, it doesn't have scaling on it, it doesn't really do damage anymore, and yeah, it really doesn't have a purpose. So this item has gotten better, but it's still one of the worst items in the entire game. The next item has been too strong in the past, got nerfed, and then we got Nooo VT, which was basically every item you wanted on crack. So now, Immortal Shield Bow is getting buffed again because BT was too strong. So what are they doing? They're increasing the flat shield by 100 the moment you purchase this item, and overall the scaling of the shield goes up by 100 as well, so you have a 600 shield compared to a 500 shield. They're also adding more physical vamp the moment your lifelink is triggered. However, here's my issue with this item if you wanted to rush this. It really isn't competitive with Bloodthirster. Bloodthirster has too much AD, and this item has too little damage. It grants you a nice shield, but the only thing that will happen is if the enemy is too scary for the middle stages of the game, you just go BT into Immortal Shield Bow. Then you have decent damage and good survivability, as well as a lot of extra vamp combining it with your boots. So I don't believe that Immortal Shield Bow is a valid first item even after its buffs. We also see a buff to Morel Nomicon. It gains 150 health and only increases by 100 gold in its price tag. Again, the same thing applies to other anti-healing items. You just buy the small component, then you sit on the component until the very late stages of the game. So if you were forced to build this because your team didn't have any anti-healing, it's a very good change for you, but you have to keep in mind, this item's health is basically the health that Crown of the Shattered Queen got removed, and it was just added onto this item. Another item which has been buffed over and over and over again is Randuin's Omen. It's now only 2800 gold, has 65 armor, and heals you for even more than before. So yeah, if you're facing a full physical damage team that has a lot of crit on it, Randuin's Omen will be your go-to if you can reliably auto-attack enemy champions to gain the healing capabilities. Otherwise, it's still just going to be frozen hard for you. Or if you need damage, just Death's Dance, because plated steel caps are the best armor item in the game and nothing even comes close. And finally, we are seeing a buff to Trinity Force. Number one, the cost is going down from 3,533 to 3,333. Well, Trinity Force, a lot of freeze, you know. And the attack damage is going up from 25 to 30. Does this mean this item is now good? No, it doesn't. But people who have built this item and needed to build this item because there's no other alternative for them have been gotten buffed by this. For example, Ezreal. And as we're talking about Ezreal, there's another change, and it's Kraken Slayer. This rune's damage goes up from 28 to 84 to 30 to 95, and the scaling goes up from 30% bonus attack damage to 40%. So let's briefly recap. Ezreal gets a direct buff. Trinity Force gets a direct buff. Kraken Slayer gets a direct buff. Do you see how many passive or indirect buffs Ezreal just got to him, just for free? This will turn Ezreal into one of the most broken or strongest early to mid game carries in the game. However, still in the late game he falls off simply because he cannot really compete with the GT or the highest tier 80 carries that go crit and have super range. But on the flip side, the Ezreal can now, if he plays well, completely take over early and mid game and end the game before this kind of thing even occurs. And for our last change, we have a buff to a Dragon Soul, and this time we have the Ice Dragon Soul. Instead of 10% damage received during the mark, we go up to 12% after the mark is triggered, and the slow is increased from 40% to 50%. You all know my takes on souls, so yeah, this doesn't really do too much. It's a nice buff because, well, if you have the soul, it's quite cool, but well, again, it is sadly not game winning. And before we end the video, let's take a look at the new skins. We have Ashen Conqueror Pantheon, Blood Moon Sivir, and Glorious Armada Olaf. And that's it for today's video. Thank you all for watching, and if you enjoyed the video, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and come back for more Rift Guides content. See you soon.